The 6 volunteers met a very tragic end at 4 o'clock in the morning on the 23rd of March. At the same time, Tom Barry and the 3rd West Cork Brigade were laying Brigade Commander Charlie Hurley in his grave in Clodagh. And it's very kind of the contrast of the great success that happened at Crossbarry, where the West Cork Volunteers successfully challenged, over 1,000 British soldiers who were involved in a roundup. And out of the 4 deaths that occurred at that, one was Charlie Hurley. And when he was being buried in another roundup in the 1st Cork Brigade area, 6 volunteers had met their deaths. One of the interesting things about their deaths was it was a result of an informer. And if you examine the 3 major losses in Cork during the 20s, the volunteers at Tripsy, the volunteers at Clohane, Ballycannon, and the volunteers at Clonmult, they were all given away by informers. There was never success of the enemy in gathering intelligence against the volunteers. It was always one individual that betrayed these men. The volunteers have been extremely active within the 1st Cork Brigade. 2 of the volunteers, Jeremiah O'Mullahan and William Deasy, had been involved in the training camps back in Ballyvorney and stuff. They had been involved in the Coolavuki ambush, and they had been on the run for several months, whereas the other 4 volunteers involved in an awful lot of the activity of the 1st Battalion. They're members of C Company, and they're involved in a good few attacks on RAC patrols, on RAC barracks, and in gathering weapons and stuff for the volunteers. And their activities have been overshadowed by their tragic death. On the particular night of their killing, they had left Cork City, and they were staying with a man in Ballycannon, Cornelius O'Keefe, and he provided a safe house for all the volunteers within the city area and within the 6th Battalion. And his house was well known for volunteers that they could go drop off arms, collect them, and if they were looking for food and shelter or for a night place to rest, they would go to his home. And he was one of the staunch Republicans who supported the volunteers in all their activities. On the night of their killing, they had been betrayed by an informer, and a roundup had begun in the area, and his farm was surrounded. First, they went to the household of Cornelius O'Keefe, and they raided that, and after searching the household, they went to the outhouses where they found the 6 volunteers. The volunteers were put up against the wall, and over a space of about half an hour, the volunteers, each one by one or possibly in pairs, were told make a run for it, and they'd be let go. And as they made a run for it, each of them was shot down and killed in cruel blood. So I just read 3 little quotations from different volunteers, which kind of give a small bit of the of an account of the brutality that these men suffered at the hands of the auxiliaries. One was an account written in the Cork Examiner at the time, and he said, "The outhouses or stables face a field with a sharp decline, pacing 20 to 50 paces. One meets the places in which they fell dead, riddled with bullets. All the sparks are marked with blood pools, and nearby the turf is cut up with sharp defiles of bullets. There are 2 such spots close together, and a third a little bit away to the right towards the division of the field. And a 4th is a large pool in which there lies pieces of flesh, and stuck to on one of the fences near at hand is a piece of a human tongue." A second one by volunteer by Micheál Murphy states that all the horrible wounds were caused by revolver bullets of sharp-pointed, nickel-coated rifle butts, some both of which had been found in the bodies. It was obvious that the young men had been told to run when revolver and rifle or machine gun bullets were fired point blank at them. The great majority of the entrance wounds were at the back, but some of the bullets caught the men as they were falling, causing terrible wounds in various parts of their bodies. And along with this is two more where it says, one by P.J. Murphy, the lads were brutally tortured and murdered. They cut out the heart of one, the tongue of the other. The nose and skulls were bashed in of the remainder. It was impossible to recognise any of them. And finally, a volunteer of the 2nd Battalion wrote, the 6 lads were captured were unarmed, were brutally murdered by the soldiers. Arms and legs were cut off, some of them, and one poor chap had his stomach ripped by a bayonet. The brutal British then poured petrol over him and set him alight. I saw the bodies horribly mutilated when they were in their coffins. So if you examine, this was not no ordinary killing. This was a war crime committed by the auxiliaries on these volunteers. As we said, they had been shot at close range. They didn't die instantly, some of them died over the next half an hour and stuff like that. And their bodies were brutally ripped apart, their tongues were cut out, as we heard the accounts. They were mutilated, their hearts were cut open out of them, their stomachs were ripped open, the leg of one of them was broke, part of a hand was chopped off, another one. And when they were being buried, they had open coffins in the church so people could see the brutality. But one of them, they could not, they had to cover his face because they basically cut his face open in half. In contrast, the volunteers have never once been engaged, right throughout the War of Independence, never once were engaged in brutal acts against either British soldiers killed or in British soldiers that were captured and let go. They always held them, the dignified manner, even when they were executing informers and stuff like that. It was simply done to a military standard. There was never the brutality that the English engaged in. And as I said, these volunteers, their lives have often been overshadowed by their brutal deaths. The 6 volunteers had all been involved in the Gaelic Athletic Association. They played GA in their local community. 2 of the volunteers had been involved in the Gaelic League. And I said these volunteers had been involved in numerous activities of the Republican movement. Some had been involved in the Coolabooking ambush, and some of them were involved in activities in the city. And even during their funeral, there was in excess of 200 British soldiers came down from Collinson's or Victoria Barracks at the time and stopped the cortege and stopped the family mourning these men and giving them a proper funeral. And they were accompanied by hundreds of RAC men and auxiliaries through the whole cortege route from the North Cathedral to here in the Republican plot. And I just kind of give a small bit of background as well to other activities that took place in the week surrounding these 6 volunteers' deaths. In East Cork and North Cork as well, I suppose, in the Connacht area, there was a volunteer, Arthur Mulcahy, who was brutally murdered in another roundup. As we commemorated last week, James Barrett had been in the prison hospital up in Victoria Barracks as well. And after his capture, he had his leg amputated. And shortly after the amputation, he was brutally beaten again with revolver butts, which contributed to his death. Another account is by Mary O'Neill of Kilbrittain Cummins. She was the only woman who attended Charlie Hurley's funeral, along with 6 family members. And she accounts that, at the time these men had been brutally murdered, Flor Begley was playing Wrap the Green Flag Around Me over the grave of Charlie Hurley. On the 25th of March, 2 days after this incident, the volunteers in Macroom were preparing for an ambush, and one of the incidents, as we kind of said, the contrast that existed in the war at the time, where the hierarchy of the church had stood against the volunteers. Often it was the case that there was individual priests who supported the volunteers through every action, And in this case, one particular priest, Father Sheehan of Ahina, had given mass to the volunteers who were preparing for an ambush, and had given the whole column, which consisted of close to 100 men at the time, breakfast in his home afterwards. In Youghal, an informer was shot, John Cathcart, and in the city, just only 2 days after the Ballycannon ambush, the members of the 2nd Battalion, under the belief that there was going to be several volunteers were now going to be executed because of the informer Crooks Connors, had prepared an escape from one of the prisons, in which there was assistance from a prison chaplain, Canon Duggan, who smuggled into the prison daggers, handguns and a mallet. And also in West Cork, the volunteers, Tom Barry had gathered the volunteers in Rosscarbery, and he had prepared for an attack on Rosscarbery barracks. And involved one incident, they had to shoot one informer who was on his way to betray the whereabouts of the column to the RSC. And in the incident, when they attacked the barracks, there was 2 RSA members killed in the attack. But the following day, when RSC reinforcements had come from places like Bandon and Clonakilty, and when they were going through the wreckage of the barracks, one of the auxiliaries threw a grenade into a group of civilians who had been watching it, killing 3 civilians, which was a 4-year-old boy. At the same time as well, on the 27th of March, which was Easter Sunday, which was the day that the volunteers were buried here in the plot, Timothy Hooley in Clonakilty was killed in an accidental shooting. And on the 28th of March 1921, Commandant Michael Leahy had just crossed over from the Swiss border into Italy, where they had been planning to bring home a huge shipment of weapons to help the cause. So that's generally the summary of the activities. As I said, we're here to commemorate the lives of 6 gallant IRA men. As I said, the tragedy of their deaths often overshadows their life, but hopefully we will learn more about them, about their activities in the Gaelic League, their activities in the GA, and their own activities and their involvement in the Republican struggle, such as those who fought at Coolavuki and their attacks in Cork City and stuff.
Gormila Mahagat Tomas. So we go with a Horda on a Horda so Agraheg and Christian Naska Kamora Nashunta, the Independent National Commemoration Committee. And we've been doing these events, as most of you know, I think, every week for over a year now, and we'll continue for the coming years. But we have a number of publications which are of interest, and a new one just published last week dealing with the period from the truce, which was in July, right up through the treaty and through to 1925, a title of a little booklet we have called Reclaiming Lost Ground, if I'm not mistaken. So we have copies of that available today. It's a little 40-page booklet, and Eddie has them here. Yeah, Sinead Cowan, yeah. Reclaiming Lost Ground, Ireland 1921 to 1925 and today. So very relevant. Mulling Deeve, €2 a hold demach, €5, highly recommended. Eddie here has them. Agus is stolam just come create a coalition no coid, or is the tradition going? Quick knowing that around the invader. They're kind of making Kale here, Yannick.
Lovely. Arrow. Salute General Harry. Arrow.
Sheena Fianna Fáil, a Hofrig Gaulegerin, Queen Narstu, Ramarkin Orani Queen, Morvesen, Shantira Shincher Fasta, the Oxford Figure on Nothing More, and all the hymns of our will, the gander will on much music, the Vanish will, in all of the land, a special thanks to the reenactment volunteers. They add completely to these commemorative events. Come on, give lads.
Con mil mágat me.